In April 1943, a dead British sailor washed up on the shores of Spain, dragging an elaborate web of deceit with him. He carried forged documents, love letters, and a waterproof briefcase containing highly classified documents. The only problem was, he never really existed. This corpse, carefully selected, prepared, and planted by British intelligence, would convince Adolf Hitler to move 60,000 troops away from Sicily, fracturing the Nazi war machine and clearing the way for Allied forces to invade. Welcome to my channel. And today, let's find out how this corpse became the most effective spy of World War II. By early 1943, Allies were ready to open a second front in the war, but invading across the Mediterranean seemed like a suicide mission. The obvious choice was Sicily, which boasted plenty of beaches. But those beaches were defended by elite German troops in the famous Hermann Göring Panzer divisions. D-Day style assaults on the mainland were planned. But in late March, Britain's Joint Intelligence Committee estimated the casualties could top 300,000. So, Britain's Naval Intelligence Undersea Branch devised a daring scheme to trick Hitler into thinking the invasion force was headed elsewhere. Top scientists, linguists, psychologists, actors, and corpse collectors all pitched in to craft what became known as Operation Mincemeat. Phase 1. The body. Lieutenant Commander Ewan Montague, a chain-smoking, fast-living naval lawyer, was placed in charge. His first order: find the perfect corpse. An ideal candidate was someone who looked British, had no known relatives, and whose death certificate wouldn't be requested. Enter Glenn Michael, a 57-year-old homeless Welshman who'd accidentally poisoned himself after eating rat poison-laced bread while staying at a shelter run by nuns. Coroners preserved his body in a zinc-lined coffin at negative 15 degrees Celsius. Perfect. Michael ticked all the boxes. He even had lung damage consistent with drowning, thanks to inhaling seawater while being swept out to sea during a storm in 1938. Montague dubbed him Captain William Martin. Royal Marines, and set about crafting a life for him. Phase 2. The legend. Now that they had their guy, it was time to give him a backstory and a reason for being in Spain. After all, if the Nazis found his documents, they would assume he was either heading to or returning from a mission. So Montague's team created an entire backstory, complete with forged documents and props. There were love letters from Pam, a 25-year-old MI5 secretary whom Martin was desperately trying to impress. Signed with lipstick kisses, these letters hinted at Martin's tenderness and humanity. Elements Hitler sought to snuff out of his enemies. Tickets for the theater production of The Gay Bride showed his refined tastes. A receipt for an engagement ring demonstrated that he had money and was in love. But the crowning touch was a stern-faced photograph for his fake military ID that made him look like an uptight superior. These personal touches made Martin more believable and therefore more dangerous. But the centerpiece of the hoax was the briefcase. Chained to his wrist, it contained Operation Husky, the fake invasion plans for Greece and Sardinia. The plans were detailed enough to look authentic, and the instructions on the maps included references to actual places, adding to their plausibility. It also helped that they chose a code name, Husky, so ridiculous that the Germans would assume it was a joke, and therefore likely to be true. But that wasn't all. Each page had a tiny hole punched through it, making it look like the maps had been removed from a larger document. To complete the illusion, Montague went as far as to place spare keys in Martin's pockets. The whole production was as painstaking as it was ingenious. Phase 3. The drop. The operation's final phase involved getting the body to Spain. On April 30th, 1943, at 11:15 p.m., the submarine HMS Seraph surfaced off Cape Trafalgar, about 65 kilometers off Spain's southern coast. 4 crewmen waded into the water with Martin's body and the briefcase strapped to his wrist. Then they anchored the corpse to a piece of wood and slipped it into the waves. As dawn broke, Spanish fishermen spotted the raft and pulled the body aboard. Soon enough, it washed up on the beach near the coastal town of Huelva. What happened next was exactly as Montague had hoped. Within hours, members of the local fascist Phalange movement, eager to curry favor with the Nazis, had notified the German consulate in Seville. Agents arrived on the scene and combed through Martin's pockets, finding nothing of interest at first. However, once they opened his briefcase, they discovered the Laura letters and theater tickets. From there, it was easy to piece together Martin's entire story. The Germans photographed every document, then dispatched a plane to Berlin to brief Hitler personally. On May 12, 1943, Hitler convened an emergency meeting with his generals, showing them the captured documents and telling them that the danger now lay in Sardinia and the Peloponnese. On May 24th, he ordered the transfer of the 1st Panzer Division, along with several other units from Sicily to Greece, believing it was crucial to stop the Allied advance. Even the 90-year-old Field Marshal von Rundstedt thought the plan was crazy, but obeyed orders. Once the bulk of the troops were gone, Hitler ordered them to keep a skeleton force behind to defend Sicily. In reality, the men stationed there amounted to less than 1/10 of the total forces and consisted mainly of green, horn, and boys. At this point, British intelligence had done its job. Hitler fell for the ruse and relocated a massive portion of his elite combat force away from the very area where the Allies would soon land. The rest is history. On July 9, 1943, 160,000 Allied troops landed unopposed on the beaches of Sicily, quickly overwhelming the defenders. By August, the British had advanced 240 kilometers inland, and the Germans were in full retreat. All this because of a dead, homeless man who never really lived. But the story doesn't end there. Back in England, Operation Mincemeat was classified, so nobody knew about it for nearly 5 decades. When the body washed up in Spain, members of the Phalange and the German Abwehr reported it to the Spanish Civil Guard. One of the officers investigating the case would later say, "We did not know that it was a British agent, or that he was dead. We believed that he was a living Englishman who had lost his memory, and although they returned the dead man's belongings to the British consulate, they kept his remains. He was buried with full military honors in a cemetery in Welva, identified only as Captain Martin, Royal Marines. The British government even placed a headstone on his grave with the inscription, 'Greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends,' words taken from John 15:13 of the New Testament. Ironically, both the church and the Bible were anti-war. The gravestone stayed there for more than 50 years, right until the year 2000, when British officials finally told the Spanish authorities the truth about Operation Mincemeat. The Spanish government decided that Michael's body should remain where it was laid to rest, and his grave was marked with a simple plaque bearing his real name. The story of Operation Mincemeat changed the course of World War II, clearing the way for the Allied victory in Europe just 3 years later. But it also ushered in a new era of psychological warfare, laying the foundation for future deceptions and disinformation campaigns. Indeed, every time you come across a news story that seems too good or too bad to be true, remember that some bodies wash up on shore and some spies die before they ever get to deliver their message. Sometimes the greatest weapon is the belief in the enemy that you can convince yourself to wield it. If you want to learn more about such brilliant strategies, then you may enjoy our video on the Trojan horse. Here, we explored the cunning plan that led to the destruction of a great city. Click here to watch it now. Thank you for watching.